committed. And it was eye-opening, even for me, who had been, at that point around the world doing investigative reporting.
Yeah. The reason I ask is that, people listen to this show, they're stepping into different spaces in their life. And I think everyone always thinks you have to be completely prepared. There's really no such thing. And you step into this space that really no one had stepped into before. You sort of created a space the way that you did it. And it was riveting. I mean, there's not a person who listens to my show or is watching this who's not familiar with you. I mean, it's became that big of a deal. And I used to watch it and think, I don't know if it ever occurred to you, like, well, that guy could be walking by me in the grocery store.
You would never know.
And that's why I wanted to have you on today, everybody. What today's show is really going to be about is obviously some insights into that show and but also lots of other things about predatory behavior. I want to talk about protecting our children, protecting yourselves if you're single and you're dating, the social media piece of it. But then even offside all of that, how do you know if someone's got ill will towards you? Is there a profile? Someone's predatory with you financially, just antagonistic towards you. So we're going to go all down that road. If you're wondering why Chris is sitting in that seat today, because I think he's the most qualified person on the planet to do it. I'm curious first, Chris, when you meet these guys, you walk in there, did anything strike you about their humanity? In other words, were they otherwise on the surface normal people? Or as you would sit there for 20, 30, 40 minutes, eventually, were there things about them other than obviously the underlying perverted predatory behavior that would give you a clue into who they were that was different?
They come from different categories, Ed. So you may have a guy who walks in who's a doctor or a teacher or somebody even in law enforcement. In a recent investigation, just a matter of months ago in Michigan, we had a prison guard, a Michigan State Corrections officer, walk in to try to have sex with a 14-year-old girl. We're doing these investigations again now, 17 years later, and guys are still showing up. So they come from different categories. You see the legit guy you could be standing next to at the dry cleaners on a Saturday morning, or standing next to you on public transportation here in the New York subway. And then there are obviously guys who, could have the word predator tattooed across the forehead. They look janky. They look like a guy who's looking for trouble. So it's a combination of things. But I think if you're looking for, that common denominator, it's really, really hard to tell on the surface. If you go beneath the surface, and you see things, there are definitely warning signs. But, when you and I were kids, our parents said, don't talk to strangers. And that was good advice then and good advice today. But the problem with online grooming, and the internet has changed all of this in so many ways, is that the person who's a stranger on a Wednesday is so adept at gaining the confidence of a child or anyone really by the end of the week that you think you know this person over the weekend.
Yeah, you use the word grooming, and it's fascinating that you did. A few weeks ago, I had Sarah Klein on. Mm-hmm. Sarah was one of the original, she was one of the original young ladies who came forward that was a victim of Larry Nassar.
Sure.
For USA Gymnastics. And she used that word grooming. Now, he could groom them because he was in there doing physicals with them. But how does that work? I've got a child. Let's give some advice to parents now. You've got a child, they're on Instagram, let's say. How does the grooming work, and what should we be looking out for? Should parents be monitoring the direct messages of their children? Do you advise that? What would your advice be if you have a child?
I think it's not a bad idea, depending on what you see and how old the child is. You need to start with an age-appropriate discussion. And I think sometimes it's as simple as, look, I'm going to trust you to have communication on the internet, to have an Instagram or Facebook or a TikTok or Snapchat, but you need to know that there are adults out there who would like to trick you for a lot of different reasons. And kids don't like to be tricked. So I think it starts there. And if you can get that point across to a child, then you can start to prepare them. There is no real effective demand reduction for this crime, right? It's not a very sexy part of therapy or psychiatry or medicine. Law enforcement does the best it can to bust and incarcerate, punish, monitor these people. But at the end of the day, it's so prolific, this crime, that your best defense is education and awareness. And that starts with an age-appropriate discussion with your kids.
How prolific is it?
That's a great question. Yeah, we used to say, 15, 16 years ago when I started talking about this, there was a number that we used to quote, and it was at any given time, 50,000 predators are online. Well, You know, it's a hard number to come up with. And we were challenged on that, and we ourselves went back to where did this come from? And it came from a speech from an attorney general, that got it from the Attorney General of the United States, that got it from one of our stories where we interviewed somebody who was a former FBI agent. And I asked the question, would it surprise you if that were true? He said, no, it could be even higher. So there's no way of really knowing it, is the honest answer, right? Mm-hmm. Common sense would tell you that there are a lot of predators online, because we've caught a lot of predators online, not just sexual predators looking to assault children, but financial predators, all kinds of confidence schemes and things that go on every day. Yeah. So it's ubiquitous, and we really don't know is the honest answer.
Yeah, that's the thing. And we're going to go there in a minute, but there's things I always wanted to ask you. And this is going to seem, I might even take some flack for asking you this question, but the first thing is that because of the way movies are made, you know, usually the bad guy in a movie is just a bad guy in every area, right? Like, but the truth is, many of these people have other redemptive qualities.
Absolutely.
And I think that's part of it. Like, well, he's a great soccer coach, or she's an amazing businesswoman, or he's so good with his own children. And so then we automatically categorize that person as there's no way they could be one of those because they have other redemptive qualities. These aren't just all bad people. This is some behavior they have that's perverted or a character flaw. They may have other redemptive qualities, and that should cause us not to discount the possibility they could be doing harm, correct?
That's absolutely right, Ed. And we see this in the predator investigations. We see people who function as an oncologist, for example, at a major biotech firm on the cutting edge of curing cancer. Yet here's a guy who is, you know, going online by tall, dreamy doc, lying about his age, trying to meet up with a 13-year-old girl in Petaluma, California for sex after a sexually charged conversation. Here's a guy who's got daughters, who's married, who has a big job, an incredible education, doing some good for society, but yet in this dark corner of his life was out trolling for kids. And I think, you know, people ask, what's the profile? Well, there's, in terms of my experience, and I'm not a therapist, and I'm not qualified to make this judgment, but in my experience, these predators break down into three different categories. There's the heavy hitter, pedophile, predator, child molester who'd be doing this with or without the internet, right? The bad Little League coach, the bad scoutmaster, the guy who's hanging out at the playground or the food court at the mall. They're going to do this. They're hardwired, whether it's because of something in their mind or because of a childhood experience, they're going to go after children. Then there's a younger group, right? 19, 20, 21, 22, socially inept, insecure, thinking that, well, this might be an opportunity to finally have a romantic experience. And maybe the best way to do this is to choose somebody who's emotionally at the same level I am, who happens to be 13 or 14. And if it works out in a couple of years, it's not that big of an age difference. You know, they'll be 16 soon. They look at it as a Romeo and Juliet situation. That's a guy who can be put on probation, punished, warned, and probably never offend. Then we have this much more difficult situation in the middle. I think there's a whole category of guys who may have an attraction to younger boys or girls in their teens.
In their genes.
In their teens. Yeah. These guys are, you know, any age, any adult age, but they have an attraction to younger kids, boys and girls. And they wouldn't act upon this without the internet, without the access to the chat rooms, to pictures. It's addictive. It's 24/7, and it's anonymous. And they find themselves saying things online to somebody who they think is a vulnerable 13, 14, 15-year-old boy or girl that they wouldn't say in person. And then at some point, they blur this line between fantasy and reality. And they may know better. They may suspect it's a Chris Hansen sting operation or an FBI sting operation or any local police sheriff's department. But they do it anyway because they get so caught up in this, fulfilling this fantasy, that they blur the line. And the next thing you know, they come knocking at our door. And that's the most difficult part, the most difficult profile to identify, to treat, to punish, and to fix in our society, I think.
Well, now that is fascinating, because that sort of helps me while I'm really processing the way you described that. Because that behavior manifests itself online now. It has created a space online where this transcends sexual predators.
Right.
For example, in my case, people will regularly make fake accounts of EdMyLETT, make them look really good, and then solicit people to buy some cryptocurrency, or if you send me $50. And these are otherwise people that I almost think, because I've actually encountered a few of these people in my last 6 years online, that I think they do blur this line where they forget what they're doing is illegal and hurting another human being. They almost get caught up in the process of it. And this is so prevalent online. Is there anything, do you agree with that, number one? And secondly, is there anything someone listening to this can do to protect themselves from any type of predatory behavior online?
Well, number one, yes, you are right. I think that's an accurate profile of what happens online. And it is this constant blur of fantasy and reality. And because it is such a vast space of potential money making, that it creates opportunity for those who are trying to scam folks. And we've seen it, especially in a difficult economy. I mean, the predator always goes for the most vulnerable, right? And not always do they start out to take advantage.
Yeah.
But once they get a sense of success or how easy it is, and it becomes financially lucrative or emotionally lucrative, they keep going until they get caught. And I suppose it's just the ubiquitous nature of the internet in some respects, but also if you provide an opportunity for bad people to execute this sort of thing, they will do it. I mean, we've seen it in our various investigations of online predators, not the traditional kind in the Hansen versus Predator or To Catch a Predator, but the Onision in Real Life series that we have now on Discovery Plus. Here's a guy who's a YouTube sensation, had a big following, was making millions of dollars, and ultimately crossed the line and started abusing and preying upon his young female followers. Mm-hmm. And it started a whole investigation, both civil and criminal. And, we did a series exposing that. Mm-hmm. And the young women who were the targets here were vulnerable for a lot of different reasons. Some because of their emotions, some because of their talent, their creativity. They felt a kindred spirit with this fellow who was also somewhat creative, talented. But also because they came from a home that there was freedom enough for them to be approached and to be emotionally taken advantage of by a guy like this. Mm. And you see it among the most wealthy people, the Peter Nygaard investigation, right. Same thing. There you have a guy who was not only a predator, but was a moneyed predator. And he could buy this sense of impunity that he had for 45, 50 years. He got away with thousands of sexual assaults. And finally, because of dedicated investigators, a civil lawsuit, that went on between Nygaard and a neighbor who did the right thing, good reporting by us and New York Times and Canadian Broadcasting Network, he finally got exposed. But who knows without this? I mean, Epstein, without the Miami Herald staying on top of this story day after day after day, Epstein probably gets away with it. And the U.S. attorney in New York at the time essentially said that. I mean, it's these guys, they have money, they have connections, they have power, and they can get away with it. And so this trickles down as an attitude on the internet.
Aren't they protected, some of them, by the bigger apparatus as well? I think I was reading that you wanted to do something on Epstein or had an inclination about him, or something came up and then it didn't happen. Is that right? No,
it was, that's the lesson of good, dogged reporting. And that's what Julie K. Brown did at the Miami Herald. I had an opportunity to look into some of this stuff. And quite honestly, Ed, I tried to fashion a sting operation in New York.
Wow.
The levels of security were so guarded that we weren't able to, penetrate it. And so I got busy with other stories, other topics, other things. And it was the Miami Herald who kept digging away day after day after day after day. And finally got the confidence of these survivors, some of them, to identify themselves and come forward and become very effective witnesses to prosecute this case.
Wow.
So do I regret not pursuing it more aggressively? Yeah, of course. But I'm also glad that Julie K. Brown of the Miami Herald did. And we've done stories around it. I continue to work on that case a bit here and there. And I think we'll come up with something soon. But, it's just a lesson of reporting. You have to, sometimes it's old fashioned legwork and just staying on it and not going for the grand slam hidden camera investigation that wins the day. And that's what won it for the Miami Herald.
Reporting aside, as a human being, what has this work done to you? How's it made you look at human beings differently overall, if it has? I mean, you've seen a side of humanity up close, in your face, multiple times, really a seat that, aside from maybe a few people in law enforcement, have ever seen. Has it changed the way you look at someone in the grocery store? Has it changed the way you look at the goodness of humans in general? I'm curious as what it's done to you as a man.
Well, it's a great question. And I think there was a time in between that it gave me kind of a dark look at society in general. And you can let yourself get caught up in that if you're not careful. And I think with time passing and perspective, I've developed a much broader, more balanced view of the world. I think that comes with, doing something for 40 years and reaching a certain age in life and having kids who are now adults, two of whom are in this business. You get a perspective that you didn't have at 40, that you now have at 62. And so it allows you not to be too hung up, but to have, a world view of things and to understand how my work can fit into that world view and improve the situation and contribute to the education of people and, to get into the minds of a predator or a criminal and to understand a little bit how that works and to hear the voice of the victim. You can create hopefully an environment where fewer people become victims. And that's kind of what all my work and my reporting is about, is creating that awareness, because at the end of the day, the cops can't arrest them all. We can't catch them all. So if you create this body of work that makes people pay attention just a little closer, you can prevent people from becoming victims. It's like in these interviews with these guys, when they get caught, anybody can jump out of the back room or from behind the bushes and create 10 seconds of dramatic video. My job is to get inside their heads, to get them to talk to me. I'm not out there to beat them up. Of course, as a human being, you get, agitated and angry that somebody would do this to a child. But my job is to understand it and to get them to spill their guts on camera so people can see it. And that's been one of the interesting things about going back and doing the podcast now, which is I immerse myself in each one of these cases. And at the time, I've got the transcripts and, I've got some background and I'm able to think on my feet and deal with these interviews. And unquestionably, even in this dark subject matter, there are, borderline humorous things that happen. And so you have to live in those moments too, because, people see it for what it is. But you gotta, get the truth out of these guys. And that's the job of it all. And I think, especially looking back, as I was saying with the podcast, I mean, you now see the bigger picture. Right? Because it may have been a time when two guys were coming in within 10 minutes of each other. Now I can sit back and watch the videos again, look at all the transcripts, see what's happened to the guy since then, know more about his background than I did when he first walked in. And we usually had a pretty good background sheet on the guys. And it gives this fuller picture. And I think in these times when kids are spending more of their days on the internet, especially during the pandemic, and when you think of how many more social media platforms are out there now, it's more important than ever to have this kind of discussion, this kind of education. Remember, when we did the first To Catch a Predator 17 years ago, we merely had... decoys in chat rooms on AOL and Yahoo. That was it. That's all we use. Now take a look at the landscape around you today.
Oh my gosh.
Look at what you and I use as men of a certain age in the media to promote our work, to have discussions with followers and viewers and fans. It's exploded. I mean, every day there's a new social media platform that I don't know about, where, potentially predators can approach children online.
I was just thinking about TikTok specifically. Younger profile. We got some data this week that says Instagram's got about 1.3 billion users. I mean, imagine that number, 1.3 billion. But that TikTok is now at 1 billion and will likely surpass them in the next 6 months. So if there are billions of people on these two platforms, and again, they're overlapping users clearly,
sure,
but that means there are millions of some form of predators online, whether that's a financial predator, a sexual predator, somebody that it's not. Not 50,000 anymore. Somebody that, even if you're a woman and you're on a dating app, just a guy who's got no intention but to be physical with you, lie to you about his intentions. To me, that's a bit of a predator. And so
it's absolutely a predator. And let me take it one step further. Mm-hmm. We did a story a week or so ago on the YouTube channel, Have a Seat with Chris Hansen, on parents who are exploiting their children online. Mm-hmm. And, you look at these family vloggers, these people who are doing stories about, their families and adopting kids, then rehoming the kids because they've got behavioral issues. We did a story on the case of Danielle Cohen, who's 15 years old. The mother of her is Jen Archambault, is essentially pimping this girl out online, making millions and millions of dollars. A young girl who's been doing this since, 11, 12, 13, all her relationships, her pregnancy, abortion, borderline child porn, and all of this makes money for the mother on their YouTube channel. Mm. Yet, when we do a story on it, even though we blur any questionable